Hey everyone, Kenny Chan here with Prosenco Group Century 21. Today's topic is a very hot topic that a lot of people don't know about because this is something that's really taken the market mostly in the last, let's say, 5 years as a somewhat common practice, and it's called an offer night. And I'm going to go through what it is, how it's different from what we consider a typical real estate transaction. I'm going to go over examples of offer nights. And I'm also going to explore some of the most common questions that I get asked when I'm representing buyers and when I'm representing sellers. So let's start. Offer night has many different names. Agents use other names like offer date. They might say offers reviewed. They might say a review date. They may say we're holding off on offers until this date. Sometimes they just call it bidding. So when I use these names interchangeably in this video, don't worry about it, I'm referring to the same thing. To really understand what an offer night is, you really have to understand what is a typical real estate transaction. I say typical simply because depending on the market you're in, there's no such thing as typical. But let's just go through what real estate may have been done 10 years ago. Okay. So property goes up for sale, there's a for sale sign. Offers can be presented or reviewed anytime afterwards. The day of, the day after, whatever. A week later, a month later, who knows? But anytime after the for sale sign goes up. The buyer presents an offer, the seller may accept it, but the seller may also counteroffer it. And then the buyer may then counteroffer that offer. And then you kind of have a little bit of back and forth, potentially. At some point, the seller and the buyer agree on the purchase. And we have a written contract called an agreement of purchase and sale, APS for short. So this APS may be a conditional sale, which means the buyer, if the buyer does something or obtains something, then they are committed to buying the property. For example, a conditional sale may involve a buyer. If a buyer is able to obtain financing or financing approval within a certain period of time, let's say 5 days, then they will buy the property. Or if the seller is able to buy their own property, then they will sell the current property that they have for sale. The next thing is after a conditional sale, assuming all the conditions are met, you can have something called a firm sale, which is an unconditional sale. Basically meaning that the buyer and the seller are fully committed to buying or selling the property to each other. If it is a conditional sale, the buyer usually has about a week to complete their due diligence. So this includes, I mentioned financing before, but it could also be a conditional sale on a buyer bringing a home inspector to take a look at the property and identify any major red flags or any major problems with the property. Or if it's a condominium, condo townhouse, or condo apartment, it could be the buyer having the buyer's lawyer review the status certificate. So let's go into an example now. Seller lists the property for $1.1 million. The buyer visits the property, puts in an offer for $950,000, conditional on 5 days for the buyer obtaining financing approval of the property. The seller then counteroffers it for $1,055,000. Buyer accepts the counteroffer and pays a deposit per the terms of the contract. The buyer then immediately begins the conditional period, and this is the 5-day conditional period. They're going to talk to their lender about securing the mortgage, because securing the mortgage, getting a financial approval, is one of the conditions the buyer will need to get approval for before they commit to buying the property from the seller. So let's say 3 days later, the seller says yes to the financing. The buyer completes the condition to their own buyer's satisfaction and then informs the seller that this is done. Now the buyer and the seller have a firm written contract, firm written APS. I know this is a very, very generalized example. We can go on for a lot longer talking about the different nuances or different details, but I just want to bring up a very simple example. So now let's compare what is a typical offer counteroffer process, like I showed you right here, versus how it might be different under a offer night, offer review scenario, and I'll give you an example of that too. So I mentioned, typically, property goes up for sale. That's when the property is available to sell. Same thing happens with an offer review date. Offers can be presented or reviewed at any time afterwards. It goes up for sale. The difference here is that the offers from the buyers are presented and reviewed on a very specific date, generally at a specific time, let's say starting at 5 p.m. on a specific date. In a typical real estate transaction, an offer and counteroffer may be common. Buyer submits an offer, seller counteroffer, buyer will counter again, etc., etc. On an offer review date, the seller usually will just pick one offer or maybe even none of them on that same date. The seller and buyer in a typical transaction will agree on a purchase, or will agree on the purchase, whether it's conditional or it's firm. Now, on an offer review date, the seller is always hoping for a firm offer, so one that has no conditions. One basically saying that all the buyers that are offering are all saying, I'm fully committed to buying this property. And therefore, buyers who present a firm offer typically do have the advantage over other buyers. Remember that most conditions, I'm not saying all conditions, but most conditions are written in the favor of the buyer, which means the buyer may back out of the purchase, assuming if the condition is unable to be met. So it gives the buyers an out, okay? Whereas a firm offer, typically the buyer and seller are committed to each other. There's very low chance that the buyer or seller can back out of this deal. So obviously, on an offer review night, where the seller is reviewing multiple offers potentially on a specific date, they would ideally hope that the offer they do accept is one that the buyer is firm and committed to buying the property from the seller. Now, in a typical real estate transaction, if it's a conditional sale, usually the buyer has a week. This might be longer, might be shorter, but that's the typical period of time that the buyer can complete their due diligence. The inspection, financing, status, etc. And an offer review date, however, the seller typically expects the buyer to do their due diligence ahead of time. Now let's take a look at an example of an offer review date. So the seller lists the property for $899,999 on January 1st with an offer date on January the 7th, basically a week later. Buyers go through the property over the next several days. On January 7th, 3 buyers end up submitting offers. For the sake of argument, we're just going to say all offers are firm without any conditions. The seller reviews all 3 offers and selects the one buyer that they like the most. The one, maybe at this example, they offered 1.2. And so the seller is happy with that offer and all the other conditions and the price. And so now the seller and the buyer have a firm written contract. So that is really all you really need to know about offer nights in less than 10 minutes. The next bit I'm going to go through are some of the most common questions that I get from buyers and sellers that I represent. So, what is the deal with the list price? Why is the property listed so low? So you can see in my example earlier, the seller lists the property for $899 but ended up selling for $1.2. So, long story short, the purpose of listing a property low is simply to attract more visitors. And the more eyeballs you have on the property, you're hoping that more visitors leads to more offers. And so the psychological nature of more offers is that the seller is perhaps hoping for something called a bidding war or multiple bids or multiple offers, where buyers see the competition or they see that there's a hot property here, potentially hot property. They see other buyers interested in the property. There's a lot of other offers on, so now they want to increase their price or maybe make other terms of their contract more favorable. Maybe if they had a condition in, they'll now remove the condition, etc. How many offers on an offer date are normal? I've personally, in my experience, seen anywhere from 0 to 70. However, based on my experience representing sellers and actually reviewing plenty of offers, I would say half of the offers that show up on offer night are not actually, quote, serious offers. What I mean by that is that they're not within what I would consider as a selling agent a reasonable range of market value, right? So as a seller's agent or even as a seller, you don't really know what the market is like for the property. One buyer may value a walkout basement significantly more than the next buyer, in which case they'd be willing to maybe pay a certain amount of money more than another buyer simply because they have certain value attached to it. Now, you as the seller, you may not see your own walkout basement as something that is particularly attractive, but you don't know what the buyer values. Therefore, you don't really always know an exact market value. However, you do generally have an idea of the range, right? So it might be a range that is plus or minus, $10,000 to $20,000, depending on the condition of the home. Maybe it needs a little bit of a renovation. Maybe it needs a little bit of repainting, a little bit of a remodel here or there. Then you can kind of say, okay, this is going to fall within that. But from my experience, when I'm sitting next to sellers and I'm showing them all the offers, giving them a summary of all the offers, typically in the first little bit, I can probably cancel out half of the offers as being not particularly serious. Why does offer nights even exist? Why is it allowed? So it is having an offer night or having a day that the seller wants to review all the offers is legal in the jurisdiction of Ontario and in many jurisdictions across Canada. Why does it exist? It's simply an offer night, this procedure of presenting and reviewing offers on a specific date exists as an extra method or extra option for the seller to sell the property, right? Some sellers may not want to have back and forth with the buyer. They might just say, you know what? I just want to sell the property on a specific date. Let's just review all of them on one day, and I'll just pick whichever one I want, or I might not pick any, right? But more common answer to this is that it's often used in a market where the seller is more favored to produce more competition between the buyers, which may drive up the market price. Are offer dates good for the buyer or the seller? This is a really difficult question to answer because it depends on the market, and it also depends on the expectations of the seller. What I mean by it depends on the market, if the market has lots and lots of properties that are within the same local area, very, very similar, probably an offer night's not a good situation because some buyers may just prefer a more traditional method of negotiating in real estate. The next thing is also it depends on the expectations of the seller. I always advise my sellers that just because you're having an offer night does not guarantee multiple offers from buyers. It also does not guarantee that the competition among the buyers will cause an increase above and beyond your expectation, right? So some sellers may have an expectation that is far beyond what one would consider a reasonable market value. Now, an offer night might produce the result that they want, but it might produce a result that they don't want as well. So that's why it depends on the expectations of the seller as well. Is the seller expecting all the offers to be firm? What if all the offers are conditional? So I've been in situations where an offer night had 0 offers, and then we put in 1 offer and it was accepted. We've also been in a situation where the seller may have an offer night where the seller was hoping for firm offers, but actually all the offers had conditions attached to them. I've also been in a situation as representing a buyer where on an offer night, I've submitted an offer with a condition. And even though there were other offers without conditions, my buyer's offers was accepted. So I can't really say that anything can be definitively good or bad, because at the end of the day, the offer date is simply a procedure. It might generate a positive result for a buyer, it might generate a negative result for the buyer. It might generate a positive result for the seller, it might generate a negative result for the seller. It really depends. So there's no way for me to answer this definitively. Everything depends on what's currently going on in the market, and have to have a frank discussion with my seller. What is a bully offer? It goes by different names. It's also sometimes called a preemptive offer or an early offer. But basically, it's an offer submitted by a buyer before an offer date. So it's done to convince the seller to sell the property early. And it's usually a firm offer that's at or above a seller's expectation. So a buyer may want to submit a bully offer because A, they don't want to wait until offer night, or B, they just really, really want this property and they are willing to provide a very attractive offer to the seller so that the seller doesn't wait until offer night, potentially sell to somebody else. That's one of the common reasons that a bully offer exists. So As a buyer, since I'm presenting an offer at the same time and date as other buyers, will I know what they offered? So the answer is no, as you see on the screen, but it really depends on the jurisdiction and local laws. In Ontario, you do not know the details of the other offers, but you do know the total number of offers. So you might know that there are 5 other offers, including your own offer, but you don't know if those offers are what the price is, the closing date, the deposit, conditions, if any. These are details that are not readily accessible to the buyer. Now, sometimes this is what is called blind bidding, right? Because as a buyer, you are putting an offer, but you don't know what the rest of the offers are. Unlike an auction, right, where there is an auctioneer and you know the price as it goes up, what the exact price is. So you know exactly the second best price, and all the prices below it as well. Now, the other thing is that sometimes, obviously, as the seller agent, I often do get questions from buyers, from buyer agents on the offer night. So let's say I'm representing the seller. I've received 5 offers, and I'm talking to my client about these 5 offers. Often not, like almost always, the buyer agents who've submitted those 5 offers want to know the place where they stand. So these are other tactics that I'm not going to get into on this video, because that is a video for, it was a much longer video in terms of talking about tactics, very specific tactics on offer nights, representing the buyer or representing the seller, that I cannot go into right now because this video is starting to get longer and longer. As a seller, do I have to sell on the offer review night, etc.? So the answer is no. You do not have to sell the property on offer night. You can sell to one of the offers, you can sell to none of the offers, or if in some cases you might actually counter one of the offers. Okay. As a seller, what if I don't get an offer I'm willing to accept on an offer date? It's very similar to the last question. You have to, like I said, you have the options, but you have to understand, okay, why are you not willing to accept an offer on the offer night? Is there something about your expectations that is maybe needs to be examined? Maybe the timing of buyers is unfavorable. So it might just happen that your offer night coincides with 5 other offer nights, and therefore buyers cannot submit 5 offers on 5 different properties because they may get accepted, right? So the timing of the buyers may be unfavorable. Maybe you have a property that's a little bit more unique, a little bit more rare, therefore it appeals to a specific type of buyer which just happened to not be around looking at the exact same time, right? Most sellers put the property for sale, and then usually the offer night is 5, 7, 10 days later. It's not guaranteed that the exact buyer that's going to buy your property is going to be looking at that exact time. Similarly, lots of other sellers competition. If there is a large number of similar properties, then why would a buyer, want to, potentially compete with other buyers on an offer night if there's lots of other availability or lots of other properties available for sale? And the next thing is obviously maybe it's better off that you try the more traditional method of selling, right? So these are all things these are topics I talk to my clients about if something's not going the way that they want it to go on an offer night. As a buyer, how can I best prepare for these offer dates, offer nights, etc.? So the most important thing is doing your due diligence early as possible. So in terms of financing, really spending the time talking to your lender about your budget and what you can afford, right? So oftentimes, once again, we're talking about very specific tactics, which should be in another video, in which I'm happy to produce. But you may want to talk to, you might send the listing details to your lender ahead of time, the condo fee, if it's a condo, property taxes, etc., and just getting a general sense of whether you get a yes or no on this property. Inspections, same thing. Some buyers will actually have their home inspector go in ahead of time to produce a report on this property, so that they know that ahead of time what are the potential red flags, if any. Same thing with status certificate for condominiums. Most importantly is truly understanding what you are comfortable paying. I spend a lot of time talking to my buyer clients about their comfort level in terms of what they're paying, because there's a psychological component to offer nights and offer dates that I really need to get my buyers' understanding, because A, they've probably never been through it. This might be their first, this might be their second. They may never have done this, so they need a little bit of hand-holding and explanation and psychological preparation for this. Next thing is, most importantly, don't worry about the list price or the ask price. It's simply just a placeholder number. So the common comparable properties might be selling at 1 million, but for some reason the listing agent has put it at $599. In which case you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, I'm paying $400,000 above the ask price. I just tell my buyers, don't worry about it. This is not this number has nothing to do with market value. It's just a number. Don't think about it in how much you're paying above list price. Just think about it, how are you paying comparative to market value? As a seller, how can I best prepare for these offer dates? So it's very similar to the buyer side. Early preparation is important. Oftentimes I will speak with my client, my seller client, ahead of time in terms of, okay, these are the few properties that have sold most recently, which will establish somewhat of a market value for your home, depending on how you're different from this home. We also try to go through the forms ahead of time. So this is what an agreement of purchase and sale looks like. These are what all the different forms will look like on the offer night, so that when you do review these offers, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 1, maybe it's 50, then you're not going to be trying to figure out these forms. You're just going to look at very specific details from the offer. Most importantly, always eat beforehand. Sometimes these offer nights can go on for 1 hour, but sometimes they can go on for 5 hours, depending on the number of offers and any back and forth that might go on. So always eat beforehand and have plenty of snacks and water as you're reviewing offers. It's hard to make a good decision when you're hungry. Last question, doesn't this all seem kind of unfair for the buyer since they don't know if their accepted offer was a lot higher than the second best? Didn't they potentially grossly overpay on the property? This is probably the most common question I get from buyers. And the short answer is it requires a much longer discussion in terms of price dynamics, supply versus demand. It's really not a question that I can unpack in a short period of time. If this is a question on your mind, we have to talk about what are the buyer's expectations, what is the seller's expectations, what are the trends going on, what are the alternatives, and obviously what is considered legal and what might require changing through legislature, through laws and stuff, right? So I can't give you a short bite-sized answer for this, but feel free to reach out to me. If you have any more questions, you can email me right there, realtorkchan@gmail.com. You can also check out more of my videos on my website. If you have any questions, I strongly recommend that you reach out to me. Happy to discuss anything, whether you're from a buyer perspective or a seller perspective. Thanks, and I'll talk to you on the next one.